Hello, welcome to the channel, thanks for watching, and this is the Chosen of Mortarion set. It consists of a Plague Marine champion, the Noxious Blightbringer and a Malignant Plaguecaster. A really nice little set, only available mail order, and you get spare parts for this guy. I've done a video on this before, and this is the torso that you get with the Poxwalkers. The spare parts come with these models though, and that's because it came out in a box set originally years ago. Now straight onto the painting, sprayed it black, sprayed it lead belcher, and we're starting off with a grell and earth, and this is a crackle paint, and because these are character models, putting a little bit more detail into them so the armour will crack and things, and you'll see that later. Moving on to retributor armour, a lot of brass parts on these models, so going around the trims, there's some symbols you'll see later on, and you'll notice if you watch this channel a lot, this paint scheme is going to be very reminiscent. In fact, it's virtually the same as some of the deathguard paint schemes I've done already, and that is because this channel is about my hobby journey, and if I'm doing a deathguard army, you may see some repetition in the videos I'm doing. So if you've seen this before and you think, or is in a deathguard paint scheme, hang around for the chat. If you've not seen this before, these are going to form part of my deathguard army, which has been the main army on the channel for quite a while now. Moving on to the deathguard green after we've done all those brass detail parts, and you're putting it over those areas where we've put that crackle paint. So we don't want to put too much of a layer on, so a couple of thin coats, build it all gradually, because you don't want to fill the gaps and cracks in. Now you'll see I'm moving through the three models as kind of a mini batch. Moving on to the bone colour here, just some bone white, and there's a lot of bone and detail on these three models. Now each of the models have got kind of slightly different mutations to each other, so go carefully as you're going through it. Get all the bone done, then moving on to a bad and black. Now, people ask often, why do I do certain things in certain orders? And sometimes there's a method to it, sometimes it's what takes my fancy. I did it the wrong way around here, and you'll see why in a second. So I painted, obviously, the plague sword, and then the piping and stuff, and some of the more kind of industrial looking cables on the model I did in the black. So down the powerfish you see there's some leading off backpacks. Moved on then to the plague wind, I think that's what it's called, that the malignant plaguecaster is casting, and just using the cold grey. Noticing the cold grey is the same as what I've done on the bases of the models. Now these model bases have been done with a green stuff rolled roller to make it look like a cobblestone street. So I'm trying to tie in the colours that I put on the model and onto the bases, and what we do with the final effect will mean this grey looks different on the two models. Now here's what I mean about probably did the black at the wrong stage, because I've done the base and I've gone over the edge of that base with that grey onto the black, and I have black edge to the base to obviously cover up that metallic base coat. Doing the brown on the base there, just that beastie brown, and again the bases are being tied into the rest of my Deathguard army, some slight variances. Go back to the black and tidy up that base edge. So realistically I probably should have left the black till after I did the grey and the brown. And that's the kind of thing I try and do when I'm doing big batches, is do them in the order that makes sense for how, if I make a mistake, how I'll be able to cover things up or whatever. So covered it up, tidied it up, and moving back now to the carrying on with the paint scheme, a royal purple onto all the kind of robes and tabards of the models, and that's because that's the colour scheme I use across my whole army to tie it together. So if you were following this along, pick a different colour, do the same colour. You could do each individual kind of champion in different robes, doesn't really matter how you're doing it. But that's the sort of colour I chose. I have no idea why I chose purple. I can't remember honestly if it's a Vectorum somewhere or not, but I quite liked it. Now this is a little bit here about very quick wet blending, and I'm using Rakkar flesh on all the fleshy areas of the model. I put it onto the Nurgling that's hanging off the Noxious Blightbringer, but also I'm pulling it down onto the tentacles. So this is going to be super quick wet blending. You'll see here I've done that Rakkar flesh 3/4 of the way down the tentacle, and then take that Screamer Pink while the Rakkar flesh is still wet and put the Screamer Pink on the end of the tentacle, and then literally smudge it into the Rakkar flesh. And what it'll do is it'll blend that Screamer Pink and that flesh colour together, and you'll see the sort of darker pink at the end of the tentacle, and then I'm working on this middle bit, it's a bit lighter. Now before that Screamer Pink dries, clean the brush off, a little bit of the Rakkar flesh onto the brush, and then merge it together again. You'll see it comes quite a vibrant pink. So that is quick 20-second wet blending. So I do that across not all the tentacles, because some of the smaller ones I just keep the Rakkar flesh colour, but across, the major tentacles to give it a little bit of visual difference and just make it look that little bit prettier. Or should I say more disgusting actually, because it is a Nurgle model. Now beige brown onto the wood areas. You can do some sort of mutated wood effects on here, and you could do some wet blending around kind of spikes and stuff. I wanted to keep it quite plain, so I literally just did a beige brown across all the models. But I have done on like previous Demon Princes, I think I did it on a Great Unclean one, where I did do the staffs kind of merged with a bit of green kind of wet blending in there. Detailing on the guns, I vary between whether I like black kind of gun casings or kind of the red. Red's very traditional, going back old school 40k, but I did a bit of red around his plasma pistol, and then just a brown onto the holster of his pistol there. It's a bit odd thinking about this model. How's he going to draw that? Because he's got his power fist in his right hand. Let's not worry about that. Should probably be on the left hand side, shouldn't it? But I did go for the two combat weapons is what the model comes with. Looks really nice. Now we've done the nurgling there, you can see with the Rackard flesh. She's gone into a yellow, and the yellow is for the pustule areas all across the model. There's not as many boils and pustules on these models as there are on some. They tend to be focused around the tentacles, obviously onto the nurgling like you can see there, and this is going to form a really good base for the Nurgle's rot I'm going to do later, so a nice yellow colour really works off the Nurgle's rot later on. Now I typically paint with just paint straight from the pot, but for the fly I did do a bit of a mix. I always use a wet palette, and I've taken some of the black that was on the wet palette and some of that purple that was on the wet palette, 50-50 mix, merged it together, and it's given a really nice kind of shimmery blacky purple that I've done the fly in. Now a nice vibrant electric blue for the plasma pistol coils, and I have been asked before why I don't do like the object source lighting you can see and have that plasma grow across the model. I have done it on my Imperial Guard before and really enjoyed it, but it doesn't really fit the vibe for what I see as my Death Guard force should look like. But if you do fancy doing that, check out the links below in the Imperial Guard lists. I talk about object source lighting in there and do a few videos, and it is a really nice fun effect. Now there's a lot of maggots across, particularly the Noxious Blightbringer. So this is a Gene Stealer purple, and it's fairly similar to the purple I use on the robes, but it is just different enough that I wouldn't want to use, the same sort of colour. Now when all that stage is dry, this is the special sauce for my army. This is a Vallejo sepia wash. I use it quite a lot. It is a very dirty, mucky ink wash across the whole model in a decent layer, and this really brings down the tones of the model, dirtifies it up, and to me makes it the grimdark stage. Now you'll see on the channel, if you watch a lot of videos, you can do this stage with Games Workshop sepia shade, for example, but it won't dirty down the model as much as this does. It will mean you don't have to do these next layers, and these next layers here are where you take all the colours you've already used, so not using any new ones, and you're going back over the panel. So I've zoomed in a little bit so you can see hopefully where that previous Agrellan Earth paint has cracked and chipped and things. That's the intention. So again, very, very thin layer of paint going across here, and you can see I'm not filling the cracks in, I'm not going into the corners and the edges, so we're leaving that wash showing through, the green showing through, and just slowly building up a very, very thin layer of paint just to bring back a little bit of the Death Guard green colour. But this is to me what makes the model my kind of style of painting, is that it's bringing up the levels a little bit without actually putting a thick layer of the Death Guard green down. Hope that makes sense. This may take some experimentation if you're doing this yourself on here, but hopefully you can see as I zoom in there, you can see all the armour is all cracked and chipped and everything. We're putting that next layer of green on top, but we're not filling everything in and we're not making it super vibrant. And in these next stages, I'm not putting the paint colours in the top left of the screen like you saw at the start of the video, because I'm just using the same paints we did before. So it cuts down the amount of paint you're going to need to use, cuts down on your thinking, because you don't have to ponder what my highlight colour is going to be. We've knocked the colours back with that wash, and now we're bringing it back up again. And you can see here, when I'm doing the robe, for example, I'm taking this purple, putting it on the very raised areas of this, and leaving it on the rest of it. So kind of two kind of ways of going at it. It's the armour, you're painting over most of it. When you're doing some of these other sections, especially the cloth and the robes, you're only really painting on the very raised areas where the light would hit, and just kind of blending and merging that colour in there. And because the colours are only going to be subtly different to what they are when you've done the wash, you can't make as many mistakes as you can if you go for a totally lighter shade of paint. I hope that makes sense. I'm going through. But check the channel out for those other videos and you'll see me doing this kind of technique all the way through. Same thing with the Nurgling. Just taking that colour we've already used and just on the very, very raised edges. Now this was more of a dry brush actually, very, very little paint on here, and just dropping on some very, very sort of subtle dry brush highlights and working around the rest of the model. Now on the staff here you can see actually just an edge highlight. I didn't go for the vast majority of the staff, just on the areas where the light hits, bringing it up that tiny bit. So Death Guard is my major army. You're going to see some more of it on the channel soon. If you watched recently, you'll know that I did a massive demon army. Well, not massive, 3,000 points is not too huge. I did a big demon army, and I'm adding some Death Guard into that, because in the new codex, obviously, there's the detachment where you can use demons and Death Guard, and that's what I'm doing. So these are going to start on the sort of formation around some of the assault units I'm going to do. There's going to be a Land Raider coming up on the channel. There's going to be some other combat units there, so keep an eye on the channel, because these models will appear inside those units, because they are really, really good buff units. Now taking Dreadful Visage, which is a contrast paint, and dropping this over the cold grey of the smoke, and that's the difference. So with the base cold grey, we've gone back over that grey as a dry brush. With the smoke, we've done the Dreadful Visage. Now moving on to two contrast paints, we've got the Plaguebearer Flesh, and I'm putting that over the areas of kind of skin on the Nurgling and on the deathguard themselves, and then a Mage's purple over the kind of pipeworks and the mutated flesh. So just to make it sort of bruised, horrible effect. Now this is Dirty Down Verdigris. Didn't do the rust on this. I've done a video recently on the Dirty Down products, the Verdigris and the rust. I'm not going with the rust on the model because there's not a lot of metallics left showing, but the Verdigris is going around the brass areas. If you want to know how to use Dirty Down Rust, I'll link my video of that down below. So Dirty Down Rust and Verdigris. But you'll notice the actual normal metallic, there's not a lot of it left showing. And I think the lead belcher spray from the very start and that wash is enough to make them look rusty in the small areas that they are. Now the models have been let to dry, and I've then varnished them with a Games Workshop varnish. Any varnish would do at this stage, matte or slightly satin. And then when that's done and the varnish is dry, this is Nurgle's Rot, and this is your friend to cover up mistakes, but also just add that level of Nurgly onto the base and onto the pustules and things. And these are the models finished. So we're looking at the noxious blightbringer here, really going to work really nicely into a unit. The plaguecaster. Really hard to take photos of this when you see them at the end because of that bit sticking out. So I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see how the cracked armour looks around those kind of areas. So really like the plaguecaster. He is going to be leading a unit of plague marines soon, and then the unit champion as well, all set up for close combat. Hopefully you enjoyed that. If you did, I'll see you on the channel again.